as we know, having access to the data, but then also keeping it safe is a tension that many leaders are grappling with. It's an ongoing struggle and certainly one that can have and present many, many challenges. And I am very lucky to be joined by a thought leader who's going to dive deep into this topic area for us and offer some of her advice, but also how she's seeing the market respond to such a challenge. Carlyn, welcome to the festival. How are you doing?
I'm great, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
You are most welcome. Let's start out, set the scene for me. Tell me a bit about your role.
Absolutely. So I'm a technical architect at Privitar. At Privitar, our mission, it's all about empowering our customers to use their data safely and ethically, which you just spoke about. And so in my role, I work directly with our customers to understand their business needs. What is it they want to do with their data? And then design solutions to help them meet those needs using Privitar software, which helps them address the issue of using it safely as well. And so in terms of what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, I'm meeting directly with our customers. It could be on the business side or the technical side. So I'm holding discovery workshops with folks on the business side. Sometimes that's program managers, that could be legal teams, data science teams, a whole bunch of different stakeholders. And then on the technical side, I'm working to define what does success look like on that side as well. We don't just want to focus on the business needs, but does the solution work from a technical perspective? So I'm working with different technical teams to understand, how do we design for scalability? How do we design for disaster recovery? How do we implement security, logging, all of that? So it's really a balance between the two. Really get to see the organization from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, and I mean, what a unique position as well, because I know other sessions that we will have had throughout the festival, but in all of our content, really, there does tend to be a bit of a focus in either the technical space or the business space. So it's really interesting that actually your job is very much in between those worlds and kind of liaising with both. And I mean, you clearly spend a lot of time helping organizations set up their data operations for success. And as you mentioned, with that, you see lots of challenges and lots of opportunities as well. What are the common things that you're seeing? So when you're going into these organizations and you're chatting with technical and with business as well, what are some of the big challenges that you're seeing organizations face today?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest and most common challenges that we see our customers grapple with is how do they strike that balance between the utility of their data and the safety of their data. So oftentimes this is seen as all or nothing, and they swing too far in the pendulum one way or the other. So in one direction, they might be, locking down their data completely, in which case they can't utilize it for insights, they can't innovate. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you might have customers who are granting access to their data too freely, and then they're opening themselves up for risk and a whole bunch of other issues, breaking trust with customers. And so the reality is you can actually strike a pretty good balance between the two. You can avoid risk, but also pursue opportunity. So that's what really needs to be focused on. How can you find that nice balance? We often see that some of the deepest insights come from the most sensitive data. And so while managing sensitive data is certainly a challenge, it really should also be seen as an opportunity.
Absolutely. And there's certainly a lot of fear there, especially in terms of that sensitive data, as you mentioned. And actually what you were saying there about the risks present and how to, basically, let's be honest, if you want perfectly secure data, it's a case of, right, if you don't touch it, then you don't do anything with it. I remember doing a podcast with a data leader from a bank and said, I can guarantee you no fraud, but you won't be able to touch any single data. We won't be able to do any transactions ever, because that's how you can guarantee it, right? So therefore, there's no business. So you have to deal with those risks, as you mentioned. So when you are presented with that sort of challenge, what's the sort of thing that you are communicating with them to overcome that, right? Because as you mentioned, you want to use data safely, you want to keep the data safe, but you also want to innovate at the same time, that pendulum that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So one thing we try to focus on is help customers understand how they can mitigate that risk. So we work with a lot of financial services companies where, as you can imagine, risk management is of critical importance. And so with them, some of the things we talk about is, I'd say two of the biggest pain points for them are, one is making sure that their data is auditable. So can they trace who had data and when, and why was that person given access to data? And so how we typically address that is we have a patented watermarking feature where we can actually trace that lineage of that data. Like I said, who gave the access, who did they give the access to, when, and what is the use case. So that can really help with whether it's getting ahead on your internal auditing, whether it's something coming from a regulatory need, or whether it's protecting yourself against a data breach and making sure that you can address that data breach really quickly if something goes wrong, and it can take months, years sometimes for data breaches to really be tracked down. So having that as a safeguard and having that as assurance and a peace of mind can be really helpful. I said another pain point is getting access to data quickly. So we see a lot of organizations, they want to get that data access, but how can they do it quickly without having any problems? And so another thing that we work on is trying to reduce that time that it takes to get access to data. I have customers who report that it takes them months to go through the internal processes to get their hands on data. And so we want to reduce that time, even eliminate that time. So an end user can just, with a click of the button, just get data and know that it's already been approved, know that it's safe, and not have to worry about, is this data safe or not? They can move forward and not have to jump through all those hoops and internally to make sure that they're working with safe data.
Yeah, I think we're in a moment of time where that sort of conversation is just, we're able to draw real life examples, right? If you and I think about what we were doing probably last year or 2 years ago, right in the midst of the pandemic, that's very, very different to where we are in a moment in time now. You've got friends booking holidays, etc. And you think of the time of business and how much that has changed. I think even if we put that into a normal business year context, so much has changed between that request versus the access and being able to make those decisions, that it's just non-negotiable now, right? That you need to be able to make those timely decisions. Yes, they've got to be accurate, but they've got to be so timely. And do you think there's an element of keeping executives engaged as well, and other stakeholders in the business engaged? Because if you're not turning things around in a quickly and timely manner, you're going to suffer there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you look at a company's data strategy, they could be leaning too far towards that defensive strategy where they're just trying to avoid risk, or they could be leaning too far towards being offensive and innovating. And it's really important to keep, executives engaged, but also a healthy balance of different departments in an organization engaged. You want the opinions of the legal team, but you also want the opinions of, the data science team. So having a healthy balance of all those opinions and keeping everyone engaged and focused on the data strategy and what will bring overall success to the company as a whole, both in terms of risk and in terms of insights and analytics.
Absolutely. And there's going to be so many people from all sorts of organizations where that strategy differs as well, especially when it comes to what we're talking about here, about access to data and being able to use it. It's a case of, does everyone need access to the data? Do you need only a subset of people accessing the most sensitive data? And having a very personalized approach to that in each organization. Do you find when you're going into organizations that there can be a bit of a challenge not to broad brush it and say, well, here's kind of the base solution for it? How do you work around that? Because every organization, every data team and data strategy is going to be so unique. So how do you get around that by kind of designing something bespoke to them?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think a lot of times people do see it that way. Come back to that all or nothing mentality, like, okay, if data is % math, then we strive to give our customers and make certain columns in your data private. You could make them, and we have 24 different ways that you can de-identify your data. So having that option is really important. Also, being able to determine kind of conditionally people in this department or can make it a much faster and easier way to create those different options. So you can say, all right, any user in Hong Kong can see such and such data. And if that person then flies to London, and London, they might see a totally different data set based on where their access is. And so having that flexibility, being able to build rules around who can see what data when and why helps have that flexibility. So just isolated to one way of looking at data.
I'm so glad you actually used the word flexible then, because that's exactly the word that sprung to mind for me, especially, we were talking about compliance just now and kind of zeroing in on the financial services. But I think everyone watching this is going to be really thinking about where their data is, how it's being stored, who then has access to it, especially if you want to really kind of extend the conversation into the kind of the future of AI ethics and having that really good quality understanding of what data is where and what you're putting into your models as well, which I know so many people are moving towards. So such a big and important area. Would you say that's kind of one of the big things that people come to you saying, thank goodness you're doing this for us? Because that flexibility, I don't think is industry wide, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. I'd say among most of my customers, the end user is some form of data science team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Today we have mature data science, we have machine learning, we have artificial intelligence, as you mentioned. These are all becoming a lot more mature, and that's, you want to get any business nowadays really wants to get their data to those teams as quickly as they can so they can draw insights. Most of our financial services customers are working with their data science teams. So they're doing things like building forecasting models to predict churn. They are using machine learning to automate processes that were previously manual. They are analyzing anomalies in data so that they can identify internal risk threats. So those are just a few examples, but for sure, I would say data science teams is where most of the excitement is and most of the innovation is, and where we're seeing unlocking that area of the business is one of the most common, I'd say, ways that businesses are trying to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we can reduce the stress of the head of data governance and data management in the meantime, that's always a positive thing for sure. Now, we've talked a lot about the business motivations behind your work, and obviously in the top of the conversation there, when you introduced yourself, you gave a certain amount of degree towards the technical side of your role as well, and I'm keen to pull those threads as well. So I wonder if you can speak a bit more to the technical side of what you're doing day to day and how technical design plays into the success of a project.
Absolutely. So, say scalability and flexibility; those are the two things that come to mind first. So, in terms of scalability, if a solution doesn't scale, it's not successful. We have a lot of our customers are global customers. They have really massive data sets. We work with a global insurance company. They're using Privitar to process tens of billions of transactions a day. So you can imagine scaling is important. And so we work with each customer individually to understand their architecture, understand their needs, so that we can design something that makes sense for them. Do we want to process their data batch or dynamically? What makes the most sense for them given their existing architecture and how we may or may not want to modify it. In terms of the flexibility side, every customer has a different environment. It could be cloud, it could be on-premise, it could be hybrid. If it's cloud, it could be multi-cloud. An organization could be in the process of migrating data from A to B, or there's just a lot of different options there. Even one organization, their architecture today and 5 years from now might look different. So being able to work with a changing environment, with a versatile environment is really important. And so we focus on, we have a containerized application, we have a Kubernetes-based architecture, so we can quickly deploy on any environment, whatever that customer has. And like I said, if that environment changes, we can work with that. Another thing I'll add on in terms of flexibility is customers are all working with different types of third-party tools as well. So we have all sorts of business intelligence tools. We have data virtualization tools. Everyone wants to plug their data in here and there, and it's great, and it's helping the accessibility piece. But if we want to be able to plug into that, we make sure that we have APIs available and we have an SDK that customers can work with. So just having as many options as you can to enable the customer to thrive in whatever architecture they have. We want to give options to a customer. We don't want to force them to conform to us. So that's also been very important for success.
Yeah, and it's something that I've heard so much from the market. I mean, attending Corinium events, and when you're stood in the exhibition area, kind of listening to providers and users kind of talking about their needs, it is that very much of having that flexibility and having the ability to kind of choose who you want for the reasons you want, and then having providers like yourself that can come in and support that and not create additional friction, which is so valuable to them for sure. Now, you spoke about scalability and how, if it can't scale, then what are you doing with it? And I think that's such a mindset I hear time and time again. What are some of the pain points that you hear, and some of the challenges that are still being overcome when it comes to scalability? What are you hearing that means that people are being prevented from really, really seeing the most out of these sorts of projects?
Yeah, I would say sometimes it's not knowing which data a company wants. Okay, I'll rephrase it another way. Data is not often used in isolation, right? It's not just one data set that we're processing. To get the value out of the data, you're frequently taking data sets from lots of different places and then processing it. So one of the challenges is not only, one person I might talk with says they know their data set really well, and I can think about how to scale for that I'd say that stakeholder within the company, but then I might have another stakeholder who has a completely different data set. So a lot of it's actually balancing, understanding all of the data, not just one data set. So understanding, how do all these pieces connect together? How can I scale not just for this department, but all the departments within an organization?
Yeah, a very big challenge for certain. And it will always end up being a bit of a spider's web in terms of how everything connects together, especially for the large enterprises joining us today, whose spider's web is a bit larger in terms of joining all of that together for certain. Now, given your position, you've got the business side, you've got the technical side, you're going into all of these various companies. I wonder if you can speak a bit more about some of the big trends that you're seeing at the moment as well, whilst I've got you. Absolutely.
So kind of what I just spoke about, using data from all these different departments, we're seeing this trend towards the democratization of access to data. And with data mesh, we also see this as this push towards domain-driven data products. And so in provisioning data for a purpose rather than for a person. And so that's where this comes into play of, okay, I need access from lots of different places, and I need to tie it all together. So how can I do that? How can I have this democratized access, but have centralized governance and centralized management of all that data so that I know that it's being done safely and securely? And then the other component of that is, of course, speed, right? Being able to access all these different places and tie all these different data sources together quickly. And so that's, another focus. It's, going back to kind of the original mission, it's like, how can you do it safely and quickly so you can get that utility?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose part of that as well is the confidence, right? We need to give leaders confidence to hand over their data, because we know, and it comes back, it all looks lovely together what you're saying here for me, because it's about that scalability. If you keep it just within the data teams and you're not upskilling the rest of the business to become passionate about using data, using insights to make decisions, it's not going to scale past the team, right? Because you can only have so many members of a team. So you've got to release it, you've got to democratize it to the rest of the business. But in doing that, you are increasing the risk, you're letting go of some controls. However, the capabilities that you've been talking about today means that you can give it over with that confidence that it's not just sending it into the wild, wild west. It is, in fact, you are remaining in control of the governance and the management. And in case of, as you mentioned, with the data masking, which I absolutely love from the ethical standpoint, but then you are also giving that confidence to you and your team to say, we've still got the reins, but it's a case of allowing that scalability to grow. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's again, going back to striking that balance. It's so important, and to have, everyone in the organization moving in the same direction, so everyone can thrive and the business as a whole can thrive.
So if I was to ask you to grab hold of a crystal ball, what would you say are your kind of ambitions over the next 12 months when it comes to this sort of technology and partnering with future customers? What are the sorts of things you want to see coming in the future?
That's a great question. I would say that one of the most exciting things or rewarding things is when you see customers really embrace the value, and when you see them get excited about the value. So I think getting more organizations, often you have one person that's really understands the value, and maybe someone who's more hesitant. And then when they are on board, it's just, you can move faster, and there's a lot of really exciting things you can do. So I think, getting more people excited about how you can get access to data, all the things you can do with it, if you know that you have that assurance of that it's being done safely, that it's being done ethically, that you're building trust with your customers. There are all these other benefits that come through, and that I really think anyone in an organization can get behind, whatever their role is. So I think that sort of, I guess, educational awareness around the benefits you can have from provisioning data in a safe way is exciting.
Absolutely, absolutely. I often joke that every data team should have a bottle of sparkling your fancy on standby for that one thought leader who you really need brought in, or that one department you need brought in. Once they understand data and they're passionate, you can all say job's done, but it won't ever be job's done, right? There's always someone else or some other function to really get bought into the mission. I love that. Now, final question of the day. What would your advice be to our audience listening today? If you had one thing you want them to be thinking about, or one thing you want them to be really considering, what would that be?
I would say take a hard look at your data strategy. It talked about that pendulum. Like, are you too far in one direction or another? Are you more focused on risk? Are you more focused on data accessibility? And what is helping your business? What does your business need overall to thrive? So yeah, I would say focus on your data strategy and how can you help your organization as a whole succeed.
Amazing. Well, Carlyn, thank you so much for joining me at the festival today.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It was great.